There are some people who walk into your life so quietly that you don't even notice them at first. They don't announce themselves, they don't demand your attention, they simply appear, like a song playing softly in another room, like the first cool breeze before a storm, like something your heart has been waiting for without ever knowing what it was waiting for. That is how Sara entered my life. I remember the exact morning. It was a Tuesday in late September, the kind of morning where the sky can't decide whether to cry or stay strong and ends up doing both at the same time. A light drizzle was falling over our university campus, the kind of rain that doesn't really wet you but settles into your hair and your clothes and somehow into your chest. I was sitting in the third row of our literature class. My bag was on the chair beside me. My notes were open but unwritten. My mind was somewhere else entirely, drifting through the thoughts that always came to me in quiet moments. Thoughts about who I was, thoughts about what I wanted, thoughts I didn't yet have the courage to name. Professor Carleder had not yet arrived. The classroom was filling slowly, students shuffling in, chairs scraping against tile floors, someone laughing too loudly near the door, someone else whispering urgently into their phone. And then the door opened one more time. She walked in wearing a pale blue dupatta that was slightly damp at the edges. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely, little strands escaping around her face like they refused to be contained. She was carrying too many books, holding them pressed against her chest, with both arms wrapped around them like they were something precious, or like she was protecting herself. She looked around the classroom with those large, careful eyes. And for just 1 second, her gaze landed on me. I looked away immediately. I don't know why, some instinct, some old habit of mine, looking away from beautiful things before they could notice that I was staring. When I looked back, she was sitting 2 rows behind me and 1 seat to the left. I told myself I was not going to look at her again. I looked at her 17 times during that 1-hour lecture. Not because she was doing anything remarkable. She wasn't. She was just taking notes, occasionally tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Once, she pressed her pen to her lower lip while she was thinking, and I lost the thread of whatever Professor Carleder was saying for a full 3 minutes. Her name, I learned later that day, was Sara. And I was Meera. Just Meera, a 20-year-old girl with ink-stained fingers and too many journals and a heart full of questions I had never dared to ask out loud. The second time I noticed Sara, really noticed her, was 3 days later. I was in the university library, the big one on the 2nd floor, with the tall windows that let in golden afternoon light. I had claimed my favorite corner, the one near the window with the broken latch that let in just a sliver of outside air. I was reading, or trying to read. The words kept sliding off my eyes without sticking. I heard someone settle into the chair at the table diagonal to mine. I didn't look up. Then I smelled it. Rain, fresh, clean, real rain, and something underneath it. Something warm, like paper and sandalwood, and something I didn't have a word for. I looked up. It was her, Sara. She was pulling books from her bag and arranging them on the table with a kind of quiet deliberateness. She didn't look up. She didn't know I was watching. Up close she was even more, I don't know. The word beautiful feels too simple, too flat, like trying to describe music with a ruler. Her hands were graceful as she turned pages. Her eyebrows would pull together slightly when she found something interesting, this tiny, concentrated frown that made her look like she was having an important conversation with the text. Once something made her smile, just a small smile, private, like she and the book shared a secret joke, and I felt a completely unreasonable surge of wanting to know what the joke was. She stayed for 2 hours. I got almost nothing done. When she finally left gathering her books, wrapping her dupatta more securely around her shoulders, she paused at the edge of my peripheral vision. "You're in Professor Carleder's Tuesday class," she said. I looked up. She was looking directly at me, calm, unhurried. "Yes," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm Sara," she said, simple like that. "Meera," I said. She nodded, like she was filing it away somewhere. Then she smiled, and it was different from the private smile she'd given the book. This one was for me, real and warm and slightly shy at the edges. "See you Tuesday," she said. And she walked away. I sat in my library corner for another 20 minutes, not reading a single word. Just sitting there with a strange, fluttering feeling in my chest, that I was absolutely not going to examine too closely. Not yet. By October we had a routine. I'm not sure how it happened. These things never happen the way you plan them. They accumulate, small moments stacking on top of each other like layers of sediment, until one day you look around and realize something has been quietly building without your permission. It started with Tuesday classes. We began sitting closer, not together exactly, not at first, but near, within speaking distance, within the range where you can lean over and whisper something during a lecture and be heard. She had a habit of writing in the margins of her textbooks, little stars next to important lines, question marks next to things she disagreed with, occasionally a tiny exclamation point next to something that delighted her. I noticed this because I had the same habit. One Tuesday I leaned over and pointed to a line in her open textbook. "I put a star on that exact sentence in my copy," I whispered. She looked at me, those careful eyes. "Which part?" she whispered back. I pointed, she read it again, then she nodded slowly and I watched the small smile form. After that we sat together, always. By the second week of October we were meeting in the library on Thursday afternoons, no formal arrangement, we just both started appearing there at 3 o'clock, as if we had planned it without words, as if our bodies had agreed on something before our minds caught up. We studied, we talked, quietly at first the way you talk in libraries, hushed voices leaning close to hear each other, then less quietly until we got shushed twice and had to press our hands over our mouths to keep from laughing. I learned things about her in those hours. I learned that she was studying literature and philosophy together, finding them inseparable. She said that she had grown up in a smaller city and moved here for university, that she had 2 younger siblings who she called regularly and missed constantly, that her mother made a particular rice dish that she claimed was the best thing she had ever eaten, and no amount of explaining could get her to describe it adequately. She'd just shake her head and say, "You'd have to taste it." I learned that she was funny, not in a loud, performing way, in a quiet, precise way. She'd say something completely unexpected and understated, and I'd laugh before I even fully processed it. I learned that she listened, really listened in a way most people don't. When I was talking, she wasn't waiting for her turn to speak. She was actually receiving what I said, turning it over, giving it weight. It made me say more than I usually said. More than I usually said to anyone. I told her about my journals, about how I'd been keeping them since I was 12. She didn't laugh or look at me strangely. She looked interested. She asked what I wrote in them. "Everything," I said, and then after a pause, "things I don't know how to say out loud." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I understand that." And I believed her. I did not name what I felt for Sara, not yet. I was careful about that. Deliberate, the way you are careful around something fragile or something that might frighten you if you looked at it directly. I had spent years being careful about these feelings, years of noticing certain things and then quickly, efficiently looking away. The way I had looked away from Sara that first morning in class, it had become a reflex, a survival instinct. Notice, look away, move on. But Sara made looking away difficult. She had a way of existing that was persistent, not intrusive, not demanding, just present, consistently, warmly, undeniably present. She showed up in my Thursday afternoons and my Tuesday mornings and slowly, quietly in the spaces between. A text message asking if I'd read the supplementary chapter Professor Carlada mentioned. A note pushed across the library table, "This author is insufferable but somehow correct." A photograph sent at 11 at night, her window, rain on the glass, the blur of distant lights. No caption, just the image, like she knew I would understand. I did understand. I saved that photograph. I told myself it was just because it was a nice image. I was lying to myself, but I was practiced at that. It happened on a Thursday in early November. The weather had turned properly cold, the kind of cold that arrives suddenly in this part of the world and makes everyone slightly grumpy and slightly more honest, as if the cold strips away pretense along with warmth. We had been in the library since 3. By 5:30 the light outside had gone blue and deep. By 6 it was dark. We were supposed to be working on separate assignments. Instead, we had somehow ended up on the same topic, the idea of silence in literature, what writers do with silence, what silence means between characters. "There are different kinds of silence," Sara said. She had her chin resting on one hand, looking at her open book but not really reading it. Comfortable silence, hostile silence, the silence that happens when someone knows something and isn't saying it. "Which is the most interesting?" I asked. She looked up at me then. Something in her eyes was careful and considering. "The third one," she said, "the silence of knowing." I felt something shift in the room, in the air, in the space between us. I looked down at my own book. "Why that one?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Because it's the loudest," she said simply. "A hostile silence is just anger with its mouth closed. A comfortable silence is just rest, but the silence of knowing," she paused. "It hums, you can feel it from across a room." I turned a page in my book without reading a single word on it. "What does it sound like?" I asked. There was a pause, long enough that I looked up. She was watching me, those large, careful eyes steady and warm and entirely focused. "Something like this," she said softly. I didn't breathe for a moment. Then the library lights flickered, the old electrical system doing its usual evening protest, and the moment broke open and scattered. We both looked away, both gathered our things, both talked about normal things on the walk to the gate, the assignment due next week, the cold, whether the canteen would still be open. But walking home alone that night, my heart was loud in my chest. Loud and fast and very much awake. Something was happening, something I had been not naming for weeks. And I was running out of ways to not name it. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in my hostel room with the blanket pulled up and the small lamp on the desk still glowing, because I couldn't bring myself to be in complete darkness. My journal was open beside me. I had been trying to write. What I had written so far was Thursday, library, Sara. And then a long, empty space. Because what came next I did not know how to put into words, or rather I knew the words. I had known them for some time. I was just afraid of what they would mean once I wrote them down. Words have a way of making things real, giving them weight and shape and permanence. I wrote finally. "I think I have feelings for her, not the ordinary kind." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I closed the journal. Then I opened it again and read it again. Not the ordinary kind. I had felt things like this before, briefly in smaller, less developed ways for other girls, for a classmate in school whose laugh I had memorized, for a teacher whose hands moved like birds when she spoke. I had named those feelings as something else: admiration, envy, something vague and unnamed. I had packed them away efficiently and moved on. This was harder to pack away. Sara was not a passing presence. She was woven into my weekly structure. She was in my phone. She was in my library corner. She was in my head at 11 o'clock at night when I should have been sleeping. And she had looked at me tonight with eyes that said something I hadn't yet gathered the courage to interpret. I closed the journal for the second time, stared at the ceiling, thought about her quiet voice saying something like this. Did not sleep until well past midnight. I almost texted her the next morning. I had the phone in my hand 3 times before I put it down. I had typed and deleted something twice. The words felt wrong each time. Too much, not enough, too obvious, too obscure. In the end, I didn't text her. She texted me. "Good morning, I found the article we were looking for yesterday, sending it now." Then, a moment later, the article link. Then, after another pause, "Did you sleep?" I looked at that last message for a long time. Did you sleep, not did you sleep well. Not good morning, did you sleep okay. Just that, simple and direct, like she already knew the answer might be complicated. I typed not really. She responded immediately, me neither. 2 words, but they landed in my chest like something significant, like a small, quiet confirmation. She had been awake too. Tuesday came. I walked into class carefully, as if the ground might be different under my feet, as if something in the room's architecture had shifted since last week. Sara was already there. She saw me at the door and lifted one hand in a small wave. The ordinary gesture of it made something in me both relax and tighten simultaneously. I sat beside her. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. We didn't look at each other directly for the first few minutes of class, looked at our notebooks, at Professor Carlida writing on the board, at our pens. Then Sara leaned over very slightly and said in a low voice, "I read the whole article last night, 3 in the morning." I looked at her then. She was looking at her notebook, but the corner of her mouth was curved upward. 3 in the morning, I repeated. "Couldn't sleep," she said simply. Our eyes met for just a second. "It was a good article," I said. "Very good," she agreed. And then we were both looking at our notebooks again, but there was something different now, a warmth in the air between us, a kind of acknowledged thing, a small, quiet thing that neither of us named but both of us felt. Something was being built, carefully and slowly and with great attention. I could feel it the way you feel a fire before you see it, by the warmth first, the particular quality of the air. November moved forward the way November does, grey and golden and cold and beautiful all at once. Sara and I fell into a closeness that was deeper than what I had words for. It was friendship, yes, but friendship doesn't quite cover it. Friendship is a wide word that holds many things, but this was something with its own specific shape and weight. We shared food across library tables. We sent each other photographs of things we found beautiful or absurd. We had long text conversations that started about literature and ended up somewhere far more personal. She told me about her first heartbreak, aged 17, a boy she had liked who had looked right through her. I told her about the way loneliness felt for me, not the social kind, but a deeper loneliness, the loneliness of not knowing exactly who you were or where you fit. She listened to that without offering easy reassurance. She just said, "I know that feeling." "Do you?" I asked. "Yes," she said, and then after a pause, "in ways I haven't fully figured out yet." I turned those words over in my mind for days. In ways I haven't fully figured out yet. I knew what that felt like, exactly. There was a Sunday in mid-November when we met for the first time outside of campus. It started simply. I had texted that I was going to the old bookshop in the market area, the crowded, slightly chaotic one with books stacked floor to ceiling and a narrow pathway through the middle. Sara had replied, "Wait for me." She arrived 14 minutes later, slightly breathless, her dupatta wound loosely around her neck against the cold. We spent 2 hours in that bookshop, moving through the narrow aisles together, holding up books for each other's consideration, discovering shared favorites and delighting in them, discovering disagreements and debating them in low voices while the shopkeeper watched us with patient amusement. She pressed a thin poetry collection into my hands near the back of the shop. "This one," she said. Her fingers were close to mine on the cover. I looked at the collection, then at her. "Why this one?" I asked. "There's a poem in the middle," she said. "Page 43, read it when you're alone." I bought the book. That evening in my room, I turned to page 43. The poem was about longing, about the particular ache of wanting something you are not yet ready to name, about standing at the edge of a feeling the way you stand at the edge of a cliff, aware of the depth below, aware of your own capacity for falling. I read it 3 times. Then I texted her, "Page 43. She replied after a moment, "Yes." Just that one word. "Yes." I held my phone against my chest and breathed. December arrived before I was ready for it. Universities have a particular energy at year's end, exams pressing down from above, social events multiplying below, everyone a little frantic and a little nostalgic at the same time, the strange mixture of urgency and tenderness that comes from knowing a chapter is about to close. Sara and I were studying harder now, more time in the library, more late evenings, more texts at unreasonable hours. The closeness between us had grown so natural that I sometimes forgot to be careful about it, forgot to maintain the careful distance I had originally tried to keep. And then there were moments that reminded me, sharply and undeniably. One evening we were both working at the library table, sitting very close because we were sharing a single large reference book. Our shoulders were almost touching. I could smell that rain and sandalwood scent that I had come to associate with her so completely that it now appeared in my dreams. She reached across me to point at something on the page. Her arm brushed mine. She didn't move away immediately. For perhaps 3 seconds her forearm rested lightly against mine, warm through the fabric of our sleeves, and neither of us pulled back, neither of us addressed it. We just stayed like that for 3 seconds or 3 decades. It was difficult to measure time accurately, and then she moved her arm back and said, "See, that's what I was referring to," and pointed at the text. Yes, I said, my voice came out perfectly normal. I was quite proud of that. Later that night, I wrote in my journal for a long time. I was 20 years old and I was falling in love with a woman. I knew this now. I had admitted it in writing to the only audience that would not judge me, my own private pages. I wrote, I am falling in love with Sara. I wrote it and then I stayed with it, and it was the most frightening and the most clarifying thing I had felt in a long time, like finally putting a name to a sound you've been hearing for months and suddenly understanding. It was music all along. I thought about what this meant, what it said about me, who I was. I had been circling this question my whole life, since that school classmate with the memorable laugh, since the way certain women moved through the world in ways that left marks on my attention, since the poems I was drawn to, the stories I returned to, the feelings I had been folding neatly away for years. I thought about fear, about what the world would say, about family and community and all the invisible structures that expected certain things from a girl like me. And then I thought about Sara's arm against mine, about her voice saying something like this, about page 43. About the way she looked at me sometimes, steadily, carefully, like she was reading something she wanted to understand fully before she turned the page. I did not know what she felt, I was afraid to know, and I was also underneath the fear terribly hungry to know. That night I made a decision. I was not going to pretend anymore, not to myself. Whatever this was, whatever I was going to sit with it, own it, let it be real in the privacy of my own chest, at least, even if nowhere else yet. I am Meera, and I am in love with Sara. I closed the journal and felt something settle, like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for years. 2 days later I found out something. It was a Wednesday. I arrived at the library earlier than usual and found Sara already at our table. This was unusual. She was typically the one who arrived after me. She didn't notice me approach. She was reading something, not a textbook, a small paperback well worn, the spine creased from many readings. She was reading it with an intensity that softened her whole face, lips slightly parted, eyes moving quickly. I sat down across from her. She looked up, and for just a fraction of a second before she composed herself, I saw something cross her face. A flicker of something, almost like being caught, like the expression of someone who was in the middle of thinking something private. She closed the book. "You're early," she said. "You're earlier," I pointed out. Couldn't focus in my room. She set the book aside, facing down. I looked at the back cover. I could read it from where I sat. It was a novel, a well-known one, a love story between two women. I looked at the book, then at her. She was watching me with her composure carefully in place, but something in her eyes was open, exposed, waiting. "I've heard that one is beautiful," I said, carefully, gently. Something in her face released, very slightly. "It is," she said. "I've read it 4 times. I nodded. We looked at each other. The library hummed around us, pages turning, chairs shifting, someone typing somewhere. And between us, the loudest silence I had ever sat inside. The silence of knowing. Just as she had described it, humming, felt across the table without either of us saying a word. After a moment she reached out and turned the book back over, cover facing up, leaving it visible, a small, deliberate gesture, a door left open. I reached into my bag and took out my own book, the poetry collection she had chosen for me. I placed it on the table between us, page 43 face-marked with a folded corner. She looked at it, then at me. And she smiled, the real one, the one that was warm and slightly shy and entirely meant for me. "Meera," she said. "Sara," I said. And that was all for now, but it was enough, it was more than enough. It was a whole conversation. The examinations descended and we were buried in them for 2 weeks. Less library time, more separate studying, more late-night texts in place of in-person hours. But the texts were different now, warmer, more personal, less pretense on both sides. She would text at midnight, "I can't focus." I would text back, "Neither, what are you thinking about?" She would reply, "Things that are more interesting than exam revision." I would reply, "Tell me one." And she would send something, a question, a memory, a thought she'd been sitting with, once a poem she had written herself, just a few lines, tentative and beautiful, about standing at a window and watching rain and thinking of someone. You wrote this, I had texted. Don't tell anyone, she had replied. Then, actually, I don't mind you knowing. I read her poem 4 times. Then I took out my journal and wrote her a letter I would never send, about what it felt like to exist in the same universe as her, about how she had changed the quality of my Tuesdays and Thursdays, about the particular way the world looked different since September, like someone had turned up the brightness and sharpness on everything. I wrote, I think you are the most remarkable person I have ever been near. I think you make me brave in ways I don't entirely understand. I think I am in love with you, Sara, with the kind of love that doesn't fit neatly into any category I was given growing up. I closed the journal, picked up my phone, texted her, I read your poem again, it's beautiful. She replied, I wrote it about something real. I replied, I know. She replied, do you? I held my breath, typed carefully, yes. A long pause. Then, okay. Then, get some sleep, Meera. Then, I'll see you after exams. I put the phone down and smiled at the ceiling. The last exam was on a Friday afternoon. I walked out of the examination hall into cold winter air and felt the particular lightness of a weight lifted, that specific emptiness that follows intensity, the way silence sounds after a loud noise. My phone buzzed. Sara, done. Me just now, you. Sara, an hour ago. I've been sitting in the canteen pretending to read. Me, where are you? Sara, still here, you. Me, near the main gate. A pause. Sara, come to the canteen. The canteen was emptier than usual. Most students had already left for home or were leaving soon. The year was over. The campus had that hollow, equi quality of a place between its own chapters. I found her at a corner table. She had a half-finished cup of tea in front of her and her journal open, though she closed it quickly when she saw me, which made me smile. Writing things you don't say out loud, I asked, sitting across from her. Always, she said. We ordered tea, sat across from each other in the quiet canteen as the light outside turned gold and then orange and then the soft grey of early winter evening. We talked about the exams, about the coming break, about her plans to go home for a few weeks to see her family. I'll miss this, she said, gesturing vaguely, the canteen, the campus, but her eyes were on me. This, I said. Thursdays, she said, Tuesdays, the library. You can text from home, I said. It's not the same, she said. No, I agreed, it isn't. We were quiet for a moment. Outside it had begun to rain, softly, the kind of December rain that feels like the year closing its eyes. Meera, she said. Something in the way she said my name, careful and warm and with a particular weight. Yes, I said. She was looking at the table, her hands were wrapped around her teacup. After a moment she looked up. I need to ask you something, she said. Okay, I said. My heart was doing something complicated. Do you, she stopped, took a breath, the things we don't say out loud. She paused. Do you have any of those about us? The rain outside. The soft clatter of the canteen. My own heartbeat, remarkably loud. I looked at her for a long moment, at those careful, warm, waiting eyes. Yes, I said softly, I have many of those. Something shifted in her face, opened. Me too, she whispered. The rain came down outside the window. We sat there across from each other in the winter light of a canteen at the end of the year, not touching, not saying more than we'd said, but with something acknowledged now, something real in the air between us. Something that had been building since September. Named at last, she went home for 3 weeks. I went home too, to my family's house in the quieter part of the city. My parents, my younger brother, the familiar smells of home cooking and the particular creak of the third stair, the comfort of known things. But I took Sara with me, in my phone, in my journal, in the space behind my ribs that had become specifically hers. We texted every day, long conversations that sprawled across hours. She told me about her home, about her mother's kitchen and the way the house smelled, about her little sister who talked non-stop and her younger brother who was going through a serious phase and read philosophy at dinner, which apparently drove everyone mad and charmed everyone simultaneously. I told her about my home, about my mother's specific opinions about everything, about my brother who was studying engineering and spoke almost entirely in equations, about the way this city felt familiar and slightly small after months at university. One evening she called instead of texting. Her voice was different through the phone, softer, somehow, more unguarded. "I keep thinking about what we said in the canteen," she said. I was sitting on the floor of my room, back against the bed. "Me too," I said. "Are you scared?" she asked. Honest question, deserving an honest answer. "Yes," I said, "a bit." "Me too," she said. We were quiet for a moment. Rain at both ends. She was getting rain in her city too. I found that beautiful. "But I'm also," she said, and then stopped. "Also what?" I asked softly. "I'm also something else," she said. "Something better than scared." "Hopeful," I offered. A breath, almost a laugh. "Yes," she said, "hopeful, that's the word." After we hung up, I held the phone against my heart for a long moment. Hopeful. Yes. That was exactly the word. We exchanged letters too, actual physical letters on actual paper. This had been Sara's idea and I had loved it immediately. There was something about writing by hand that was different from typing, more deliberate, more committed. You couldn't delete a sentence once you'd written it in ink. You had to own it entirely. Her first letter arrived 11 days into the break. The handwriting was exactly what I expected from her, neat but with personality, letters that leaned slightly forward, as if in a hurry towards something. She wrote about being home, about her family and the comfort and also the slight smallness of it, about reading late at night with tea, about a walk she had taken near a park where the winter trees were bare and somehow beautiful. And then, near the end, "I want to say something clearly, Meera, in ink where I can't take it back. What I feel for you is not the ordinary kind. I think you know this, I think you feel it too. I am not sure what comes next or how or at what pace. I only know that I don't want to lose it, whatever it is, whatever we are. I want to keep it carefully, the way you keep something you know is rare." I read that paragraph approximately 40 times. Then I sat down and wrote back, 6 pages, my longest letter. I told her things I had only previously told my journal, about the feelings I'd been not namming and then finally namming, about what it had felt like to sit across from her in the canteen in December rain, about page 43, about the way the world had changed quality since September. I wrote, "I am not the ordinary kind either, Sara. I have known this for a while, not just about you, about myself. I have been circling it for years. But you made the circle smaller and smaller until I was standing at the center of it, and there was nowhere left to look but directly at what was there. I wrote, what was there is you. It has been you since Tuesday in September." I sealed the envelope carefully, posted it the next morning. She came back to campus on a Tuesday. Not our usual Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the new semester was still a week away. She came back early, and she texted me from the bus. "I'm on my way back. We'll be at the hostel by 7. I had been back for 2 days already. "I'll be here," I texted. She arrived at 7:43. I know because I looked at my phone when she texted, "I'm here." I had been in my room reading, or attempting to read. I had been rereading the same paragraph for 20 minutes. I walked across the hostel compound to her building. It was cold, stars visible, the particular stillness of a campus between semesters. She came out of the entrance just as I arrived. We stopped, looked at each other. 3 weeks, it had been 3 weeks, and somehow she was both exactly as I remembered and slightly more real, slightly more herself. She smiled. I smiled back. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. And then, without either of us deciding it, she stepped forward, and I stepped forward and we hugged. It was the first time we had properly embraced. She was warm, she smelled like rain and sandalwood and the cold of outside. Her arms around me were real and certain. Mine around her were everything I hadn't said out loud and everything I had said in ink. We stayed like that for a long moment, longer than a purely friendly hug, long enough to mean something, long enough for both of us to know it meant something. When we pulled back, we were both smiling, the kind of smile you can't control, the involuntary kind. "Good break?" she asked. "Better at the end," I said, when the letters arrived. Something warm moved through her face. Mine too, she said. We walked to the small garden near the hostel compound, sat on the stone bench in the cold, shoulders touching, talking, then not talking, then talking again, the stars above and the cold around us, and between us warmth. We didn't make declarations that night. We didn't need to. The letters had held the declarations. The hug had held them. The 3 weeks of daily calls and the rain on both ends and the way she had written something I know is rare. We just sat together in the cold January night, present, real together. And that was enough, that was everything. January became February. The new semester had its own rhythm. New classes, new schedules, the familiarity of returning to known patterns but finding them slightly changed, slightly deeper. Our pattern was deeper now. We still had Tuesday classes and Thursday afternoons, but everything was richer, more layered. We walked between classes with our arms occasionally brushing and didn't hurry to move apart. We sat in the library with our heads close over books, and the closeness was acknowledged now, owned, chosen. There were small intimacies that accumulated. The way she would find my hand under the library table sometimes, not dramatically, just quietly placing her hand near mine, fingers touching, and I would turn my hand and she would thread her fingers through mine and we would sit there, reading, while our hands held each other beneath the table where the world couldn't see. The way she began leaving small things at my door, a note, a piece of fruit from the canteen, once a single page torn from a notebook on which she'd written 3 lines of a poem she was working on. I kept everything, I have it all still. The way she looked at me had changed, or rather I now allowed myself to see it fully, to receive it. She had been looking at me this way for longer than I'd acknowledged, with that particular quality of attention that isn't casual, that is specific, that is chosen. She looked at me the way you look at something you want to memorize. I looked at her the same way. Valentine's Day in this country is a complicated affair, officially frowned upon in certain quarters, observed quietly by many, a holiday that exists in the gaps between what is permitted and what is felt. Sara didn't say anything about it in advance, neither did I. But on the morning of February 14th, there was a note under my door. Small, folded in quarters. Inside, her handwriting, just one sentence. Everything I haven't said yet, I mean. I held that note in both hands and read it 3 times. Then I took out paper and wrote back. Everything I haven't said yet, I mean too. Slipped it under her door on my way to class. When I saw her that afternoon in the library, neither of us mentioned the notes. We just sat down across from each other. She looked at me, I looked at her. And both of us smiled the uncontrollable smile. That was our Valentine's Day, entirely private, entirely ours. I thought it was the most romantic thing that had ever happened to me. There was an evening in late February that I have returned to many times since, in my mind, in my journal, in dreams. We were in my room. This had become normal by now. We studied together in the library but sometimes in each other's rooms as well. Safer, quieter, more private. It was past 9 in the evening. We had been studying for hours. The books were still open on the desk but neither of us was looking at them. We were sitting on the floor, my back against the bed, her back against the wall beside the desk. The room lamp was on, golden. Rain outside, there was a lot of rain that February, wind pressing against the window glass. She was telling me about a memory from her childhood, a summer somewhere, her grandmother's house, the way the afternoon light came through old windows, the particular smell of old wood and rain. Her voice was soft, private, the voice she used only in small spaces. I was looking at her while she talked, at her profile in the lamplight, at the way her hands moved when she described things, at the particular beauty of her in an unguarded moment. She turned to look at me mid-sentence and stopped. I didn't look away this time. "What?" she said softly. "Nothing," I said. "You'll just keep going." "You were looking at me," she said. "Yes," I said, simply, honestly. Something moved through her eyes, that open, warm, waiting look. "How?" she asked, very quietly. I found the words without looking for them. They had been waiting. "Like you're important," I said, "like you're very important." The rain on the windows. The lamp's gold light. She looked at me for a long, still moment. Then she moved, just slightly, closed the small distance between us, and she rested her head on my shoulder. My heart, my hands, the whole room. Still, I rested my head against hers. We sat like that while the rain fell outside, her head on my shoulder, my head against hers, her hand finding mine between us. Not a word, not a single necessary word. Just the rain and the warmth and the undeniable, beautiful, frightening, wonderful truth of what this was. March brought the first real warmth of the year, pale sun appearing between clouds, the campus trees beginning their slow, stubborn return to green. And it brought, inevitably, the moment when things had to be said out loud. Not because something had gone wrong, but because something had gone entirely right, and staying in the comfortable almost said wasn't enough anymore. Not for me, I needed to know. I needed to hear it and say it and have it exist in spoken air. Not just written pages and held hands and heads on shoulders. I chose a Saturday afternoon. We were in the old garden on the east side of campus, a neglected, slightly overgrown garden that almost no students used, which was exactly why we liked it. We had found it in October and it had become ours. We were sitting on the grass under a large old tree. The afternoon light was doing something beautiful through the new leaves. Her shoes were off. She was threading a blade of grass between her fingers absently. I had been quiet for a few minutes longer than usual. She noticed, she always noticed. "Meera," she said. "I need to say something," I said. She was still attentive, those eyes. "I've been not saying it for a long time," I said. "In letters it's easier, in the dark it's easier, but I want to say it in daylight." She waited. I looked at her directly. "I love you," I said. "Not the ordinary kind. I love you the way I've been afraid to love anyone. I love you in all the ways that don't have comfortable names and don't fit neatly and are not perhaps what the world expects of me. I love you specifically, Sara, not the idea of you. You. The wind in the tree above us. A bird somewhere." She looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes were very bright. Then she said, "I love you too." She said it simply, without decoration, the way she said important things. "I have loved you since the library in October," she said. "Since you told me you write things you don't know how to say out loud, I thought there is someone who lives where I live, someone who knows the inside of that quiet." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were glittering. "I was afraid," she said. "I have been afraid, not of you, of everything around this, everything that would have opinions, but I was more afraid of losing what we have, of staying quiet until the silence became permanent, of one day not having you and knowing it was because I didn't speak when I had the chance." She reached out and took my hand. Her hand in mine in the daylight, in the open air, in the March afternoon. "She's mine now," she said quietly, half to herself with a small, wondering smile. "I think I've been saying that inside my head since that Tuesday in September. She's mine now, even before I understood what that meant." I laughed, soft and helpless. "I thought the same thing," I said, "about you since the library." She shook her head. "October, I was yours from October." "October then," I said. She squeezed my hand. We sat under the tree in the March light, hand in hand, present, named, chosen. Ours, I want to be honest here because this is a true story. And true stories are not only beautiful moments under trees in afternoon light. True stories have weight and difficulty and the complicated texture of real life. Being in love with Sara was the most natural thing I had ever felt. It required no effort, no performance, no pretending. With her, I was simply and fully myself for the first time. But existing in the world as two women who loved each other was not simple. We were careful, not because we were ashamed, I want to be clear about that. We were not ashamed. We had both moved slowly and honestly through our fear to a place of genuine acceptance of who we were. I was someone who loved women. Sara was someone who loved women. We had each arrived at this understanding through our own private journeys, and we held it with care and with something like wonder. But the world we lived in had its arrangements, its expectations, its surveillance of young women and what they did and whom they were close to. So we were careful. Our love existed in private gardens and library corners and text messages and the warm, enclosed space of each other's rooms. It existed in held hands under tables and heads on shoulders and long phone calls after midnight, in letters, in the margins of books, in glances across classrooms. It was ours, entirely ours, and we protected it. I am not saying this was without cost. There were moments of frustration, of wanting to be ordinary, of wishing the world were arranged differently so that we could simply be openly, without calculation. There were moments of fear, of wondering about the future, of the particular loneliness that comes from carrying something precious and being unable to share it fully. We talked about these things, honestly and with care for each other. "Are you okay?" she would ask, not a passing question, a real one. Most of the time, yes, I would say honestly, sometimes no. "Tell me the no," she'd say. And I would, and she would listen, and sometimes she would have her own no, and I would listen to that. We were not naive about what we had or what it existed inside of. We were clear-eyed, but being clear-eyed about difficulty doesn't mean choosing despair. It means choosing to love anyway. To say, I see what this costs and I choose it still because what it gives is more than what it costs. That was our choice, made freshly every day. There was one afternoon in April when I came close to losing my balance, not with Sara, with myself. I had come back from a family visit. My mother had been asking in the carefully indirect way of mothers about my future, about plans, about the shape of the life she hoped for me. Marriage, stability, the expected architecture of a woman's life. I had smiled and answered in the expected ways. I had been good at this kind of performance for a long time. But riding back on the bus, alone with my thoughts, I had felt the weight of it. The gap between the life being imagined for me and the life I was actually living, the love I actually had. I arrived back on campus and went directly to Sara. She opened her door and looked at me once and said, "Come in." She didn't ask questions, just made space. I sat on her bed, she sat beside me. After a moment I put my head on her shoulder. She put her arm around me. "Family visit?" she asked. "Yes. Hard. Yes." She was quiet, held me. After a while I said, "Do you ever doubt it, what we are?" She thought about this for a moment, honestly. She always engaged with hard questions honestly. "I doubt the world's arrangement," she said. "I don't doubt us." I exhaled slowly. "I don't doubt us either," I said. "I just miss the version of this that doesn't have to be hidden." "I know," she said, "me too." She tightened her arm around me. "One day," she said quietly, "maybe not this year, maybe not easily, but one day we get to be more than this, more open, more ours in the world, not just ours in private." "You really believe that?" I asked. "I believe in working toward it," she said, "which is not quite the same as believing it will just happen, but yes, I believe it's possible." I sat up and looked at her. She looked back at me, steadily, warmly. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. And the word between us meant something substantial. It meant we are in this together. It meant the difficulty is real, but so are we. It meant I choose this and you and us today and probably tomorrow and probably the day after that. She tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, a small, careful gesture, her fingers briefly against my face. "You're not alone in it," she said. And I believed her completely. By May I understood love differently than I ever had. Before Sara, love had been something I understood theoretically, something I read about in the books I loved, explored in the poetry I returned to, witnessed in others from a careful distance. The love I felt for my family was real but familiar, worn into comfortable shapes over years. This was different. This was education. Love, I was learning, is not primarily a feeling, or rather it is a feeling but it is also an action, a choice, a practice. It is the daily decision to pay attention, to show up, to be honest even when honesty is uncomfortable, to hold someone's difficulty without trying to fix it, to be held without feeling diminished. Sara taught me this not by explaining it but by doing it, consistently, with a kind of quiet faithfulness that I came to depend on and then came to emulate. She paid attention to small things. She remembered what I said weeks ago and circled back to it with new thoughts. She noticed when I was quiet in a different way than usual. She asked questions that went below the surface without being intrusive questions that said, "I see more of you than you've shown me, and I'm interested in all of it." I tried to do the same for her, to learn her particular rhythms, to understand the difference between the quiet that meant she was content and the quiet that meant she was far away, to know when to reach across the table and when to let her have her silence. We were learning each other, slowly and with great care, like learning a language, starting with the vocabulary, moving through the grammar, getting to the place where you sometimes thought in it without translating first. I began, tentatively, writing poetry, real poetry, not just journal entries, the kind you mean for a reader. I showed it to Sara first, terrified. She read it carefully and said, "This one line here, this one is extraordinary." She pointed to the line. It was, "I have been afraid of my own hands, but you taught me what they're for." She looked at me after she read it. "Is this about me?" she asked, gently. "Yes," I said. She folded the paper carefully, put it in her own journal without asking. I watched her do it and felt something so full and fine it was almost unbearable. There was an afternoon in mid-May that I want to describe, not because anything dramatic happened. The opposite, in fact. I want to describe it because it was simple, because it was one of those hours that feel in the moment like a pause in time, like the universe offering you a perfect, uncluttered window. We were in the garden on the east side of campus. Our garden. The air smelled like new growth and warmth. The sky was that particular blue that belongs entirely to late May afternoons. We were lying on our backs in the grass, side by side, looking up, our hands between us, not doing anything in particular, not talking much, just there. She had her eyes closed, a small smile on her face. I was looking at the sky, at the way the light came through the leaves of the old tree, at the blue, blue sky. "What are you thinking?" she asked, without opening her eyes. "Nothing," I said, and it was true in the most beautiful way. I wasn't thinking, I was just being, just here in this grass, in this light, beside this person. "Me too," she said. We lay there for a long time. At some point her hand found mine and held it, fingers interlaced, natural, like breathing. I thought, this is what it is. This is love, not just the dramatic moments, not just the declared feelings and the letters and the answered questions. Also this, the ordinary afternoon, the blue sky, the hand, the nothing. I thought, I am lucky, impossibly, inexplicably lucky. I squeezed her hand. She squeezed back without opening her eyes. June arrived, and with it the first proper rains of the season. Not the light, hesitant drizzles of September and November. Real rain, rain that meant it, rain that arrived with wind and drama and dark, urgent clouds. I had always loved rain, but since Sara I loved it differently. It had become tangled with her in my senses, her smell that first morning, her damp dupatta, the rain photographs she sent at night, the rain outside the canteen window on the December day we named what we felt. Rain was hers or she was Rain's, either way they were inseparable in my mind. The first big rain of June came on a Wednesday afternoon. Neither of us had class. We were both in our respective rooms when it started. She texted, "Rain." I texted back, "Rain." A pause. She texted, "Come out in it." I looked out my window. The rain was serious now, thick and silver and relentless. I texted, "You're serious." She texted, "Always." I laughed, put on my oldest dupatta and went outside. She was already there, standing on the path between the hostel buildings, not sheltering under anything, just standing in the rain, her hair already wet, her clothes already soaked, her face turned upward slightly. She heard me coming and turned. She was laughing, delighted, completely soaked and entirely delighted. I stopped a few feet away. "You're mad," I said. "Come here," she said. I walked to her, the rain on both of us. Warm summer rain, not cold, the warm kind that runs down your face and soaks through fabric within seconds. We stood facing each other in the rain. She reached out and pushed a wet strand of hair from my face. Her hand was warm even in the rain. Her eyes were bright. "I love you," she said, out in the rain, in the open, not under a library table, not in letters, out loud in actual air in the June afternoon. I felt the words land in my chest like something solid, like being given something you didn't know you'd been waiting for. "I love you," I said back, out loud, into the rain. She smiled, the full smile, the uncontrollable one. She took my hand and we stood in the rain together, and if anyone was watching from a window, they saw two friends standing in the rain, perhaps being a little eccentric. They did not see perhaps the held hands, the foreheads briefly touching, the particular quality of the look between us. But we knew, and the rain knew, and the June afternoon knew. And that was enough. July. The hottest part of the year, the campus quieter, fewer students, more silence, more space. We spent those weeks in a kind of golden, private summer, slower than the semester, more hours, more unhurried time in the garden and the library and each other's rooms, reading together, cooking badly in the small shared kitchen and laughing at the results, taking long evening walks on the quieter parts of campus when the heat of the day had eased. She was teaching me things without knowing she was teaching me. She was teaching me what it felt like to be fully known by someone, not the curated version of yourself, the real one, the uncertain, complicated, layered real one. I had spent years being careful about what I showed people, presenting the parts that were acceptable and keeping the rest in journals and private thoughts. This careful management of self was exhausting in a way you only notice when you finally stop doing it. With Sara, I had stopped. She knew about the parts that were still figuring themselves out, about the fears that came at 3 a.m, about the tension between who I was and the expectations layered around me, about the grief of not being able to simply be in the world without calculation. She knew all of this, and she was still here, still choosing this, still reaching across library tables and squeezing my hand and turning up in my doorway with books and notes and the quiet certainty of her presence. Being fully known and still chosen, I had not understood what that would feel like. It felt like stepping out of a room you'd been in so long you forgot you were enclosed. One July evening we were in her room, the fan overhead turning slowly. A power cut had taken the air conditioning and we'd opened the windows to the humid evening air. Somewhere outside someone was playing music on a phone, faint, unidentifiable. We were lying on her bed, side by side, looking at the ceiling, not touching except where our arms lay close. "What do you want?" she asked. The question arrived out of comfortable quiet. She asked it often, not impatiently, thoughtfully. She was interested in the answer every time. "Right now," I said. "In general," she said, "from life, from the future." I thought about it, really thought. "I want to write," I said. "Really write, not just journals, books maybe, or something. I want to say things that matter and have someone read them." "You will," she said simply. "You don't know that," I said. "I've read your journal entries when you've shown me. I've read your poem, Meera, I know that." I felt warmth in my face. "What do you want?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I want to travel," she said. "I want to read everything ever written. I want to be in a place someday where I don't have to edit myself before existing in public." A pause. "And I want you." The fan turned overhead. The distant music. "I want you too," I said. Her hand found mine in the dark beside us. "Then that's a good start," she said. There was a night in late July when everything was very still and very real. We were sitting on the small rooftop of the hostel, building a rooftop that was technically for laundry, but practically served as an escape for students who needed sky above them instead of ceiling. The stars were out, the city hummed below and around us, the night was warm but bearable. We were sitting close. She had my journal open on her lap and was reading something I'd written last week with my permission. I was looking at the stars and waiting. She turned a page, turned another. Then she put the journal down gently and looked at the sky. "You're very good," she said. "You're biased," I said. "Both can be true," she said. I smiled. She turned to look at me. In the starlight her face was all planes and softness. Her eyes were dark and clear. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Always," I said. "I used to be afraid," she said. "Not afraid of anything specific, just afraid. Afraid that what I felt inside was too strange, too much, too outside the expected. I used to think that something was wrong with me because I didn't feel what I was supposed to feel, and what I did feel didn't fit any of the maps I'd been given." She looked at her hands. "And then you happened," she said, "and it turned out I just needed the right map, the one that acknowledged the actual terrain." I looked at her for a long moment. "You changed me too," I said, "in the same direction. You made being myself feel possible." She looked up, her eyes bright. "We're lucky," she said. "Yes," I said, "incredibly." She leaned her head against my shoulder. I rested my cheek against her hair. The stars above us, the city around us, summer ending in the distance. 2 women on a rooftop, in love, Real and complex and afraid sometimes and brave more often and entirely, thoroughly, completely alive. September came again. A full year since a Tuesday morning when a girl walked into class with damp edges on her dupatta and too many books pressed against her chest. We were in our third year now. Same campus, new courses, the same library with its same corners and particular smell of books and time. The first Tuesday of the new semester, Sara came into class and sat beside me. She had always sat beside me now. That was not remarkable. What was remarkable was that she put a small, folded piece of paper on my desk as she sat down. I opened it. Inside, Happy Anniversary. Underneath, in tiny writing, 1 year ago today you looked away too quickly, I noticed. I looked at her. She was looking at her notebook, but the corner of her mouth was curved. I wrote back on the same paper, 1 year ago today you smelled like rain. Slid it back to her. She read it, her smile became uncontrollable. Professor Carlada walked in. We looked at the front of the room, both smiling. 1 year. It felt like a breath. It felt like a lifetime. I want to tell you about a particular evening in October of that second year, because it holds something important, something about what love actually asks of you. Sara came to my room looking unlike herself, not outwardly distressed. She was too composed for that, but I knew her by then. I knew her particular quiet, and this quiet had a weight in it. I didn't ask immediately. I made tea, let her sit, let her find it herself. After a while she said, I told my older cousin, about me, not about us, just me. I went still. This was significant. This was the kind of telling that has consequences, the kind that takes the private and makes it semi-public, semi-permanent. How did it go? I asked carefully. She was quiet for a moment. Not badly, she said. She was confused, and then she was trying to understand. She asked a lot of questions, some of them were good, some of them were hard. Yes, hard, a pause. She kept saying things like, are you sure? And is it just a phase? And I kept saying, yes, I'm sure. No, it's not a phase. And she kept looking at me like I was someone she was trying to re-recognize. I moved to sit beside her. But she didn't, I began. She didn't reject me, Sara said. No, she held my hand eventually, and she cried a little, and she said she loved me, but she also said she was scared for me, which is, Sara exhaled, which is its own complicated thing, being loved and being pitied at the same time. I took her hand, she held mine tightly. You're brave, I said. I don't feel brave, she said. That's what bravery usually feels like, I said. She leaned against me, I held her. Outside, October rain. Are you okay? I asked. I will be, she said. Tonight I'm just processing. Then we'll just be here, I said, processing. She exhaled, relaxed slightly against me. Thank you, she said quietly. Always, I said, November again. Second year, the wheel of the year completing and continuing. We had built something. I want to say that clearly and with the weight it deserves. We had built a relationship, not just a romance, though it was that, a relationship in the fullest sense, something with architecture, with history, with its own language and its own jokes and its own particular tenderness. We had built trust, the kind that is made of small consistencies, of being where you said you'd be, of saying what you meant, of sitting with each other's difficult nights and celebrating each other's small victories, of fighting sometimes because love requires disagreement and learning to come back from disagreement without damage, of giving each other space and knowing the difference between distance that is chosen and distance that is avoidance. I had learned her, not completely, never completely, people are always unfolding, but substantially, the details of her, the way she slept with one hand under her pillow, the way she hummed faintly when she was writing and didn't know she was doing it, the way she became very still when something frightened her, very still and very composed, which looked like calm but wasn't, the way she laughed when something genuinely surprised her versus the way she laughed when she was being polite. The way she loved fiercely and quietly without announcement, through action, through presence, through the steady, faithful showing up. She had learned me too, all my difficult edges, the way I went inside myself when I felt overwhelmed, the way I sometimes said I was fine when I wasn't, the way I needed time alone to process and emerged calmer, the way I was braver in writing than in speech and needed her to sometimes say, out loud, what I had written in ink. We knew each other. Really, fully, deeply knew each other. And we loved what we knew. There is a moment I want to tell you about, the last moment I'll share in this story, not because the story ends here. It doesn't. Our story was still unfolding, still being written, still happening. But this moment feels like a summary, like a single image that holds the whole. It was a November evening. Not late, 6 o'clock maybe. The sky outside our library window was doing something extraordinary. Clouds and light arranged in a way that happens sometimes, briefly, before the sky changes its mind. Gold and rose and a particular shade of deepening blue that sits at the edge of darkness. We were at our table, books open, tea cooling, the library quiet around us. I had been writing, a poem actually, long overdue, something I'd been circling for weeks. Sara was reading, her chin in her hand, that concentrated slight frown on her face. I looked at her. I had looked at her hundreds of times over the past year. Thousands, probably. I had looked at her in every quality of light, morning light and lamp light and the blue-grey light of rainy afternoons. I had looked at her when she was laughing and when she was sad and when she was far away in her own thoughts. But this particular looking on this November evening, with the extraordinary sky outside, and the library quiet around us and the poem half finished in front of me. This particular looking felt like something complete. Like arriving. She felt me looking and glanced up. Met my eyes. And smiled. Just that, the simple, warm, real smile, the one that was mine. I smiled back. She went back to her book. I went back to my poem. And the poem I wrote that evening ended like this. September brought her, damp at the edges. Arms full of books and careful eyes. I looked away too quickly. I looked back 17 times. And all the words I hadn't found for years found me all at once. In a library in October in the warmth of someone who finally made the whole complicated, frightening, extraordinary question of being myself feel like an answer. She was mine. I was hers. And we were at last exactly who we were. If you are listening to this story and you are someone who has felt what I have described, if you are someone who has loved quietly and in secret and in the margins of permitted things, if you are someone who has written in journals and looked away too quickly and folded your feelings neatly into the unreachable interior of yourself, I want to tell you this. You are not wrong. The love you feel is not less real for being complicated. It is not less valid for being outside the expected map. It is not less beautiful for living, for now in private gardens and library corners and late-night texts. It is love, full and real and worthy of the name. The world is changing, slowly, not without difficulty, not without cost, but changing. And you are not alone in it. Somewhere there is someone who will understand you, who will find your journal and your page 43 and your particular kind of quiet, who will reach across a table and find your hand, who will stand in the rain with you and say the words out loud, who will say, she's mine, and mean it, and mean everything in it. Hold on. Stay true. Keep writing in the margins. The story isn't finished yet.